Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. How did my wife and I choosing to eat pizza on Thanksgiving lead to her mother facing criminal charges? It started with a single text message she forced us to send. Let me start by saying that I'm not a huge fan of Thanksgiving, never have been. The food is mediocre at best, the family drama is exhausting, and the whole production feels forced. My wife feels the same way. We'd rather spend the day relaxing at home, maybe ordering some good food, watching movies, and not dealing with the stress. For years, we'd been attending Thanksgiving at my wife's family home. Her mother, who I'll call mother-in-law, is one of those people who needs everything to be perfect. She plans Thanksgiving like it's a military operation. Seating charts, timed courses, assigned dishes for everyone to bring, dress codes, the whole 9 yards. Missing Thanksgiving or showing up late is treated like a personal betrayal. My wife and I had been together almost 8 years at this point, married for 5. Every single Thanksgiving had been spent at her parents' house, enduring hours of forced conversation, passive-aggressive comments, and her mother's need to control every aspect of the day. About 6 months before this particular Thanksgiving, my wife and I had started going to therapy. Not because our marriage was in trouble, but because we wanted to set better boundaries with our families. The therapist helped us realize that we were both people pleasers who had trouble saying no, even when saying yes made us miserable. One of the exercises our therapist gave us was to practice saying no to family obligations that we genuinely didn't want to attend. Start small, she said. Work your way up to bigger things. Thanksgiving seemed like the perfect opportunity. About 5 weeks before the holiday, my wife called her mother to let her know we wouldn't be attending this year. She kept it simple and polite, just said we were planning to do our own thing this year and wouldn't be coming. You would have thought we had announced we were joining a cult. Mother-in-law lost her mind. She demanded to know why. She insisted we had to come because family is everything, and this is what we do. When my wife held firm, mother-in-law started calling multiple times a day, leaving voicemails that ranged from guilt-tripping to angry to tearful. My wife's father got involved too, calling to say how disappointed he was and how much this would hurt mother-in-law. Her brother sent texts saying we were being selfish and unreasonable. The pressure was intense, but we stuck to our decision. Our therapist helped us draft responses that were polite but firm. We weren't being cruel. We weren't cutting them off. We just weren't attending one holiday dinner. But to hear mother-in-law tell it, we might as well have personally attacked her. As Thanksgiving approached, the pressure intensified. Mother-in-law sent multiple texts per day. She mailed us a letter outlining all the reasons we needed to attend. She had other family members call us to try to change our minds. At one point, she even showed up at our house unannounced with a printed schedule for Thanksgiving Day, trying to get us to commit to at least part of the festivities. We politely turned her away at the door. The week before Thanksgiving, mother-in-law tried a new tactic. She called my wife crying, saying she'd ordered and prepared food based on our attendance, and now it would all go to waste. This was obviously manipulative. She knew weeks in advance we weren't coming, but it was designed to make us feel guilty. It didn't work. Then came the demands. Mother-in-law started insisting that if we weren't going to attend, we at least needed to provide a legitimate excuse. A work obligation, an illness, something she could tell the other family members so she wouldn't be embarrassed. This is where things get important for what happened next. During one particularly heated phone call 3 days before Thanksgiving, mother-in-law was ranting about how we were ruining her holiday and embarrassing her in front of the family. She demanded that we provide her with a detailed written account of our Thanksgiving plans that she could show to family members to prove we had a legitimate reason for not attending. She said, and I quote, "If you're going to humiliate me by skipping Thanksgiving, you better give me something I can tell people. I want every detail of what you're doing instead in writing so I can explain to everyone why my own daughter couldn't be bothered to show up." My wife, exhausted and at her wit's end, said fine. She'd provide exactly what her mother demanded, a complete, detailed, written explanation of our plans that mother-in-law could share with anyone she wanted. On Thanksgiving morning, per her mother's demand for a detailed written account of our plans, my wife sent this text message. "Since you insisted on knowing our plans in writing, we're sleeping in until 10. Then we're going to make coffee and watch the parade on TV in our pajamas. Around noon, we're ordering Thai food from our favorite place. We'll probably watch some movies in the afternoon. We might go for a walk if the weather is nice. In the evening, we're planning to order pizza and watch more TV. Then we're going to bed early. That's our entire day. No emergency, no other obligation. We just want a quiet day at home. Feel free to share this with anyone who asks." She hit send and we both felt a weight lift off our shoulders. We'd been honest. We'd answered her mother's demand for information. We'd given her exactly what she asked for. A detailed written explanation she could show people. Now maybe she'd leave us alone. We were so naive. Within minutes, my wife's phone started ringing. Mother-in-law was calling repeatedly. We ignored the calls. Then the texts started coming in. Dozens of them. From mother-in-law, from my wife's father, from her brother, from aunts and uncles and cousins. All of them expressing shock and disappointment that we were choosing takeout and TV over family. How dare we? How selfish. How disrespectful. But we'd made our decision and we stuck to it. We turned our phones on silent and enjoyed our quiet morning. Around 11, there was a knock at the door. We ignored it, assuming it was mother-in-law showing up to harass us in person. The knocking persisted, getting louder. Then we heard it. "Police, open up!" My wife and I looked at each other in confusion. We went to the door and looked through the peephole. There were 2 police officers standing on our porch. I opened the door. The officers looked somewhat uncomfortable. One of them asked if we were okay, if everything was all right in the house, if anyone was in danger or being held against their will. I was completely baffled. I told them we were fine, everything was fine, we were just having a quiet day at home. The officer explained that they'd received a cop's call from a woman claiming she was worried about her daughter's welfare. The caller said her daughter had been behaving strangely, was being isolated by her husband, and hadn't been heard from in days. The caller expressed concern that something terrible might have happened and requested a wellness check. It took me a moment to process what was happening. Mother-in-law had called cops and lied to get the police to come to our house. I was furious, but I kept my cool with the officers. They were just doing their job. My wife came to the door and confirmed she was fine, we were both fine, and her mother was angry we weren't attending Thanksgiving dinner. The officers were clearly annoyed at having their time wasted. One of them made a note in his little notebook and said something about filing a report about the misuse of emergency services. They apologized for the intrusion and left. We should have known that wouldn't be the end of it. My wife called her mother immediately and told her in no uncertain terms that calling cops with a false report was not okay. Mother-in-law insisted she wasn't lying, she was genuinely worried, and if we had just answered our phones this wouldn't have happened. This was gaslighting at its finest. She'd spoken to us just hours before via text. She knew we were fine, this was pure manipulation and harassment. We blocked her number and went back to enjoying our day. The food arrived right on schedule and it was delicious. We watched bad movies and actually had a really nice, relaxing Thanksgiving. But that night, around 8, there was pounding on our door again, loud, aggressive pounding. Then we heard it. "Police, we're coming in!" Before we could even get to the door, we heard a loud crack. They were breaking down our door. Multiple officers rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting for us to get on the ground. We complied immediately, terrified and confused. Our dog was barking hysterically. It was absolute chaos. Once they had us secured and determined there was no threat, one officer helped us up and explained the situation. They'd received another cop's call, this one claiming that someone at our address had a weapon and was making threats. The caller said she could hear yelling and what sounded like a weapon being loaded. Based on the serious nature of the call and what they believed was an active threat situation, they made a forced entry under exigent circumstances. My wife was in tears. I was shaking with rage. This was mother-in-law again, and this time she'd put our lives in danger. Forced entry situations can go wrong, people get hurt or worse, all because she was angry we skipped Thanksgiving. The officers searched our home, found nothing suspicious obviously, and started to piece together what had happened. When they asked if we knew who might have made such a call, we told them about mother-in-law and the earlier wellness check. The officers were not happy. One of them made a call to their supervisor. I was terrified at this point. I know that swatting, making false emergency calls to trigger police responses, sometimes results in charges against the victims too if police think they were involved. I made it very clear to the officers that we had no idea this call was coming, that we'd already had one false wellness check earlier that day, and that we wanted to press charges against whoever made the false report. I gave them my phone to show the timeline of harassment from mother-in-law. They took detailed statements from us. They gave us paperwork about the forced entry and the damaged door. They were apologetic about the situation but explained they had to respond to calls like that with maximum caution. One officer said the call had come from a woman claiming to be a neighbor, but the phone number would be in the report. After they left, my wife tried calling her mother from my phone since mother-in-law was blocked on hers. Mother-in-law answered cheerfully, probably expecting someone else. When my wife identified herself, mother-in-law immediately launched into a guilt trip about how worried she'd been, how we'd ruined Thanksgiving, how everyone was disappointed. My wife cut her off and asked if she'd called cops again. There was a pause. Then mother-in-law got defensive and said she only told them what she felt might be happening based on how we'd been acting. She insisted she was genuinely worried and had a right to call for help when her daughter wouldn't answer the phone. When pressed, she hung up. We spent the rest of the night cleaning up the mess from the forced entry, trying to calm down our traumatized dog, and attempting to process what had just happened. Neither of us slept well. The next morning, we went to the police station to file a formal complaint. We provided all the texts, voicemails, and documentation of mother-in-law's harassment leading up to Thanksgiving. We explained the pattern of behavior and the 2 false cops calls. We had the text message where she demanded our detailed plans, and we had her admission over the phone that she'd made the second call. The officer we spoke with was sympathetic and took everything seriously. He explained that filing false police reports is a crime, especially when it results in emergency response situations. Making a false report about weapons and threats is particularly serious because it puts officers and residents at risk. People have died in situations like this when things go wrong. They opened an investigation. Over the next week, detectives contacted us for additional information. They pulled the cops' call recordings. They interviewed the officers who responded. They built a case. They traced the phone calls back to mother-in-law's cell phone, which she apparently didn't realize could be done. Mother-in-law, meanwhile, was on a campaign to paint herself as the victim. She told the extended family that we were cruel and heartless, that she'd only called the police because she was genuinely worried, and that we were overreacting by involving law enforcement against her. She conveniently left out the part about the weapons claims and the broken door. Some family members believed her version. Others reached out to us privately to say they knew something wasn't right about her story. A few cousins who'd dealt with mother-in-law's manipulative behavior over the years weren't surprised at all. My wife's brother called and said he didn't believe we'd actually gotten mother-in-law arrested and that we were making it up for attention. My wife was devastated by the family division but held firm. She'd spent years trying to please her mother, walking on eggshells, accepting unreasonable demands. The therapy had helped her see how unhealthy it all was, and this situation proved it beyond any doubt. About 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, mother-in-law was charged with 2 counts of filing a false police report. The second one, involving the weapon claims, was charged as a more serious offense due to the danger it created. She was arrested, processed, and had to post bail. The arrest became public record, and suddenly her victim narrative fell apart. It's hard to claim you were just a worried mother when you're facing criminal charges, and there's documentation of exactly what you told cops dispatchers. The family dynamics shifted overnight. People who'd been criticizing us started asking what really happened. When we shared the full story, the months of harassment, the boundary violations, the manipulative behavior, the specific demand for written details of our plans, and yes, the false cops calls including fabricated weapon threats, people were shocked. Several family members admitted they'd always thought mother-in-law was controlling but had never seen her do anything this extreme. Others said they wished they'd spoken up sooner about her behavior. Mother-in-law hired a lawyer and tried to fight the charges. Her legal strategy seemed to be claiming she was genuinely worried about her daughter and just wanted to ensure our safety. But the recorded cops' calls told a different story. In the first call, she'd claimed we hadn't been heard from in days, which was provably false based on text message timestamps. In the second call, she'd invented specific details about weapons and threats that had no basis in reality. Her lawyer tried to get the charges reduced or dismissed. The prosecutor wasn't having it. False cops' calls waste police resources, create dangerous situations, and undermine the entire emergency response system. The prosecutor pointed out that officers had responded to what they believed was an active shooter situation, breaking down a door and entering with weapons drawn. Someone could have been killed. Mother-in-law's legal troubles became the talk of the extended family. Thanksgiving, the holiday she'd been so desperate to control and perfect, had turned into the catalyst for her downfall. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My wife's father, who'd initially sided with mother-in-law, started to distance himself. We later learned that he'd been unaware of the extent of the harassment and was horrified when he heard the cops' recordings. Apparently, mother-in-law had told him she'd only made one wellness check call and that we were blowing everything out of proportion. Her lawyer eventually advised her to accept a plea deal rather than go to trial. Going to trial meant the cops' recordings would be played in open court, and there was security camera footage from our doorstep showing the forced entry. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to probation, a significant fine, and mandatory counseling. The court also ordered her to pay restitution for the damage to our door. But the real punishment was the complete destruction of her reputation. Everyone knew what she'd done. The family members who'd once enabled her controlling behavior now kept their distance. People stopped inviting her to events. Her friends from church found out about the arrest and started avoiding her. The narrative she'd built of being a devoted mother whose ungrateful daughter abandoned her completely fell apart. My wife struggled with guilt at first. Despite everything, mother-in-law was still her mother. But our therapist helped her work through it. She reminded my wife that mother-in-law had made her own choices, and the consequences were entirely her own responsibility. We'd simply set a reasonable boundary, declining one holiday dinner, and defended ourselves when that boundary was violated in a criminal way. What really drove it home was when we got a letter from mother-in-law's lawyer demanding we drop the charges and stop cooperating with prosecutors. The letter tried to frame the whole thing as a misunderstanding and suggested we were being vindictive. Our lawyer responded with copies of all the harassment messages, the police reports, and a timeline of events. We never heard from mother-in-law's lawyer again after that. The following Thanksgiving, we did the same thing we'd done the year before. Slept in, ordered takeout, watched movies, had a quiet day at home. But this time, nobody harassed us about it, nobody called the police, nobody tried to guilt or manipulate us into attending family obligations we didn't want to attend. Several family members did reach out beforehand to invite us to their Thanksgiving celebrations, making it clear there was no pressure and they'd understand if we wanted to do our own thing. We appreciated the invitations, but politely declined. Maybe someday we'd attend family Thanksgiving again, but it would be on our terms when we wanted to, not because we felt obligated or bullied. Mother-in-law completed her probation and community service. The counseling was apparently court-ordered, but we have no idea if she actually engaged with it or just showed up to check boxes. She occasionally tries to reach out through other family members, usually around holidays, but we maintain our boundaries. We're not interested in reconciliation unless she gets serious help and makes genuine changes, which seems unlikely based on the flying monkeys she still sends our way. The extended family is still somewhat divided. Some people think we're too harsh for maintaining no contact with mother-in-law. These are usually people who haven't experienced her manipulation firsthand, or who benefit from staying in her good graces. Others completely understand and have actually set better boundaries with her themselves as a result of everything that happened. A few cousins have even thanked us for exposing the dysfunction because it gave them permission to distance themselves too. My wife's father divorced mother-in-law about a year after all this happened. Apparently, the criminal charges and family fallout were the final straw in a marriage that had been struggling for years. He'd been planning to leave anyway, but this incident made it clear he couldn't stay. He's apologized to us multiple times for not standing up to his wife's behavior sooner. We have a decent relationship with him now, though it took time to rebuild trust. Her brother eventually came around too after mother-in-law pulled similar manipulative behavior on him over something unrelated. He called to apologize and admitted he hadn't wanted to believe his mother was capable of what we'd described. Seeing it directed at himself opened his eyes. Looking back, all of this happened because we did exactly what mother-in-law demanded. She insisted we provide her with a detailed, written account of our Thanksgiving plans that she could share with family members. She wanted every detail so she could explain to everyone why we weren't attending. We complied with her demand completely and honestly. She just didn't like the answer. If she'd never made that demand, if she'd just accepted our polite decline and moved on, none of this would have happened. But she had to push, she had to control, she had to make it a crisis. So we gave her exactly what she asked for. Complete transparency about our plans in writing that she could share with anyone. Takeout, TV, pajamas, and a quiet day at home. We followed her instructions to the letter. The malicious compliance wasn't in our actions on Thanksgiving Day. It was in taking her demand for information at face value and providing exactly what she asked for, knowing it would infuriate her but being completely within our rights to do so. We didn't lie, we didn't make excuses, we didn't try to protect her feelings or come up with an acceptable reason. She demanded the truth in writing, and we gave it to her. The fact that she responded to that truth by committing crimes was entirely her choice. We didn't make her call cops. We didn't make her lie to emergency dispatchers. We didn't make her fabricate a story about weapons and threats. Those were all her decisions, made because she couldn't handle the reality that we were adults capable of making our own choices about how to spend our time. These days, my wife and I host our own quiet Thanksgivings. Sometimes friends join us, sometimes it's just the two of us. We eat whatever we want, sometimes turkey, sometimes Thai food, sometimes pizza, sometimes fancy steaks we cook ourselves. The point is, it's our choice. We're not performing for anyone. We're not meeting anyone else's expectations. We're celebrating the holiday in whatever way makes us happy, and nobody calls the police on us anymore. Our door has been repaired, though we upgraded to a reinforced frame and better locks. Our dog eventually stopped freaking out at loud noises, though it took months. Our marriage is stronger than ever, built on mutual respect and healthy boundaries rather than obligation and guilt. Mother-in-law missed out on that. She could have had a relationship with us where we saw each other on our own terms, built on genuine affection rather than forced compliance. Instead, she chose control and manipulation. She demanded detailed information about our Thanksgiving plans in writing. She got exactly what she asked for, and she lost everything else in the process. Every Thanksgiving now, when we're sitting on our couch in our pajamas eating whatever we decided to order, my wife and I acknowledge the absurdity of how we got here. A simple boundary, not attending one family dinner, spiraled into criminal charges, a broken door, and permanent estrangement. All because someone couldn't accept that no is a complete sentence. The takeout is always delicious, though. The next one is a malicious compliance story. At the time this happened, I was a 33-year-old woman working with a group made up mostly of misogynistic middle-aged men. This happened in 1985. I know, I am old. I was working for the United States Department of Agriculture Forest Service in the Rocky Mountains as an engineering technician. My main job was designing logging roads and supervising several survey crews that surveyed those roads. However, like all Forest Service employees, part of my job during the summer fire season was to help fight forest fires wherever we were needed. This particular fire happened on the district next to ours, so I was familiar with most of the roads. I liked to go four-wheeling on weekends, which meant I knew the back roads in that area fairly well. Instead of digging fire line as usual, I was assigned to the communications room. I manned the radios, took requests for equipment resupply, and handled various other tasks as needed. Those jobs were rotated so people could get breaks from sitting at a desk for 12 hours. One day, instead of using a helicopter to drop lunches to the line crews working high up the nearest mountain, someone decided that a truck could make the trip up and deliver the lunches to them by way of an old dirt track road. I was chosen for the job. For some reason, a higher-up from the regional office decided he wanted to come along and see what was happening up close. In my regular job, I was used to traveling on backcountry roads. I had been doing it for 9 years, so I was very comfortable and skilled on most rough roads. He had me drive because I knew the area and because he had been sitting behind a desk in the regional office. About a mile up the mountain, the road began getting narrower and narrower until it was basically just 2 tracks cut into the side of a steep mountain. I told my passenger that I was getting nervous because there was nowhere to turn around if we needed to go back down. He told me to keep going. Since he was essentially my boss, I did. Eventually, the road became too narrow to continue. There were also boulders in the way that were far too large to drive over. There was no way forward. I was not looking forward to backing down that narrow road for 2 miles, but I knew I could do it. The higher-up insisted that I turn around right there, on that narrow dirt track. I tried to talk him out of it, but he insisted. When turning around with a steep mountain on one side and a drop-off on the other, you always point the front end of the vehicle toward the drop-off and the back end toward the mountain. I knew it would take a lot of tiny turns and careful maneuvering to get the pickup turned around, but I was confident I could do it. About halfway through the process, with the front end pointing outward toward the drop-off, the man insisted that I could move just a little bit farther forward. Again, this was some high-ranking muckety-muck who could potentially make or break my career. So, while internally rolling my eyes, I inched the truck forward. The pickup tilted slightly downward along the mountain. Then I tried to put it in reverse. We did not move. There was not enough weight in the bed of the truck to give the rear tires traction. I simply turned and stared at him. At least he had the decency to look a little sheepish. We ended up having to call over the radio for another truck to pull us out. A helicopter had to deliver replacement lunches to the fire crews after all, although they arrived late. Later, when the fire superintendent asked me what had happened, I told him the truth. He told me I should have trusted my original instincts, but he did not completely blame me. From what I understand, the desk jockey was not allowed to visit any more fires after that. The next one is an entitled People story. I work for a bankruptcy company that does corporate bankruptcies. Basically, when a company goes BK, the bank gets the notice and letter and they have to shut down the checking account so no more transactions can go through and money in the account goes to the company like one I work for so they can distribute between creditors. Most banks, pretty easy process, usually happens within a week, max 2 weeks. You get a check and it goes into a state if there is money in the account. This bank manager for a whole month and a half made me jump through hoops to close this account. When I sent notice and I realized no check hasn't come to us in 2 weeks, so I tried calling. I have ended leaving her several voicemails for days. I couldn't have left an email because this bank does not give out their emails. Stupid policy when it's a legal matter. When she finally called me back, she requested I send her original signed documents by the client. Absolutely not, that stays with me. I sent her copies, even though the branch was included on the original notice, so now she has 2 copies, and she wanted it by mail and wouldn't give me email. Then she asked for proof from the government that we are the trustee, and finally gave out a fax number. I sent it, even though a copy was sent with the original first letter. Then she asked to speak to the trustee. I told trustee all this, and he said to escalate to legal and CC him, so I did. I sent an email with a zip of every correspondence request, call recording, and fax with date stamps that I made. I included everything, and I was pretty pissed at the time because I was getting nowhere and nervous about upcoming transactions. Lo and behold, I get the check same-day courier and 6-month statements I requested, and I noticed transactions have been going through, so a pretty large chunk of money is missing because automatic payments came out and that's not allowed. I called her again to work out a plan for reversing transactions, and her extension was no longer going to her voicemail. It was a generic message now, and I got a call back from some other manager that is now working with legal to reverse transactions that came out so they can remit money to us, and looks like she got fired. I feel like it went too far for her to get fired. This is fixable, and vendors typically reverse transactions when there is bankruptcy. I have done it before. Also, it seemed like she was trying to avoid fraud because I would also be nervous sending a pretty massive check to a third party. Oh well. The next one is an entitled parent story. I am 19 and FTM. I have a dad who is in his 40s, and I have known him since before I was born. He beat the shit out of my biological father for abandoning my biological mother because my biological father did not want the baggage. My dad, whom I will refer to as Trump Dick Sucker, or TDS for short, decided he would help my biological mother raise me, and he did. For the first nearly 13 years of my life, he was there. Jump ahead to sometime between 2023 and 2026. That is when I believe TDS discovered MAGA and Trump. My best guess about the timeline and how he discovered that world comes from a story he told me. He was living in a big city at the time and went to his very first Pride event. While there, he saw one person holding a dildo. One person. That was enough for him. He told me he quickly left after seeing that. The story only came up because I was telling him, around 2023 or 2024, about my experiences with the LGBTQA+ community and how much happier I had become. But to TDS, because of that one single out-of-context moment, he automatically decided that all LGBTQA+ people are predators who prey on and pollute the minds of young, impressionable children. That was when I connected the dots. I realized he must have found MAGA groups on Facebook and started getting all his facts about the LGBTQA+ community from them. I tried to tell him that he should not get his information about a group from people who are not part of that group. I mean, you would not ask a guy from England to explain the history of Japan, would you? But TDS would not listen. He told me he was old school, and that nothing would change his mind. After that day, I started noticing things about him that I had not fully seen before. Every time he called me son or my boy, it sounded hesitant, almost forced. But whenever he accidentally misgendered me, he sounded completely sure of himself, as if my identity was just a phase I would eventually grow out of. He also began posting about MAGA and Trump on Facebook. He even went as far as saying that Trump being on the files was AI. What the duck? Now, maybe I could understand it a tiny bit more if we were American. At least then it would make some sense. But here's the catch. We are Canadian, and we are Native American. How and why the duck are you a MAGA supporter when the guy you worship talks about removing Native Americans from current and future states? And how can you say Doug Ford is bad at the same time? Doug Ford is basically a Canadian version of Trump. If you think the orange Oompa Loompa is going to spare you because you support his every whim and would worship the ground he walks on, you are dead wrong. Everything reached a boiling point on June 1st of this year. I commented on a Facebook post. The post said something like, Republicans are trying to convince you this is evil, and showed a picture of a family from the 1950s. I decided to comment my thoughts using historical facts about that time. I wrote something like, so misogyny, sexism, forced gender roles, the common and recommended practice of eating disorders, and lobotomizing women for having a mind of their own is not evil. I also talked about how the economy back then was completely different from the economy now. TDS saw the comment and sent me a direct message. He said, and I quote, "If you lived in a time of common sense, it would all make sense. Sorry, had to say it. Father, the duck, so lobotomies are okay? Forcing girls and women into the mindset of breed, clean, repeat until dead is okay? I should have remembered that MAGA supporters often refuse to accept anything that was not puked out by their God, and I'm not talking about Jesus. I blocked him right after that, but before I did, I explained how I felt. I told TDS that I understood everyone has a right to their own beliefs, but saying another group is bad simply because they believe in something different is not and should not be tolerable. I explained that it felt like he only loved his version of me. It felt like he would rather have a dead daughter than a gay son, and that made me feel hurt. Then I blocked him. But I will see TDS soon. In August, our home reserve is having a powwow. I know he will be there, and I know I will be there too because I want to see the rest of my family. I will see him. I will walk past him. I know that much. But will I talk to him, let alone have a civil, unbiased conversation with him? I do not know. I just needed to vent. I will post an update a few weeks after the powwow. If anyone has questions, I will try my best to answer them. Anyway, thank you for watching.